Before we start, I did just want to mention, I'm sure that you've been hearing a lot of things about the census from a lot of different directions. And so I can and I will be pointing you towards additional webinars, toolkits, and resources that could provide some of the same information that we'll cover today. But we just wanted to make sure here at OLIS that with all of the information that might be coming in from so many different channels, that we highlight what's going to be most relevant to you and your libraries, and help you to cut through the noise around the census and feel confident that you have the information that you need and that you know where to find the information that you might not have yet. So that is why we are doing this. Some of this content you can find in other places, and I will go over all of that as well. So let me just, all right. So what to expect from this webinar today. This is going to be broken down into three main sections. So the first falls under kind of a general Census 101. What is the census? Why is it important to everyone, not just libraries? Also, some of the logistics. How does the census work? And what things could go wrong in the census? Why are we talking about it so much and front-loading all of this knowledge, because things could go wrong? The second part, we'll answer that question, why do I, a person who works in a library, need to worry about the census? And then finally, we will talk about specifically things that are happening around Rhode Island and how you can tap into those efforts without having to start anything from scratch. There's a lot going on in Rhode Island, and so I will be also sharing that with you. So at the end of this webinar, you should be able to define the census and its importance, express why libraries ought to be aware of census efforts, and you should be able to craft a plan for how you can participate in statewide outreach efforts here in Rhode Island. So we're going to jump in now with our Census 101. Quick disclaimer, I do not work for the census, but I have worked with the census since they started the end-to-end test in 2018 in Providence County, which you may have heard about. I have been working with Karen Meller in my office, who is on the statewide Rhode Island Census Complete Count Committee. She's also on the nationwide American Library Association Census Task Force, and so I've been her number 2 on the census this whole time. So I feel like I work for the census sometimes. So many of the slides for the Census 101 were adapted from the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee, and we're going to talk more about what that is in the Rhode Island section, but just so you know, this information is available through them as well. So what is the census? There's one big overarching goal. If you remember nothing else about the census, it is that we want to count every person in the United States once and only once in the right place. So the United States Constitution requires a complete count of every person in the country every 10 years. The last time we did this was in 2010. The next time will be in 2030. You may also hear the census referred to as the decennial census, once every 10 years. So our next census is starting this March and will run from March to July of this year. And the census is meant to be a point in time snapshot of where people are living as of the date April 1st, 2020. The census is a simple questionnaire form. It has, depending on how many people live in your house, anywhere from 10 to 20 questions. One person in each household should fill it out, and it should only take 10 to 15 minutes. And this year the form can be completed online at the census website, by phone, or by mail, a paper form that you can mail in, which is, as of 2010, the only way that you could do it in the past. Something to know about the census that I think people might be worried about, your responses are private and secure. So federal law prohibits the Census Bureau from sharing personal data with anyone for any reason. That includes landlords, law enforcement, immigration officers. The President of the United States cannot request information from the census. This has been protected by the Constitution. It has been challenged before and has always been successfully upheld in the courts. So why is the census important? The main thing that people think of when they think of why we want to remember to do our census and fill everything out is that the count that we get from the census determines federal funding across the country. So Rhode Island receives an estimated $3.8 billion every year from the federal government. And our population count lasts 10 years. So an undercount this year will be the number we are stuck with until 2030. So we want to make sure that we count everybody who actually lives here in Rhode Island. Otherwise, that could mean a loss of significant funding across the next decade. And we don't get a chance to fix that until 2030. Some of the federal programs that are supported with funding that is determined by the census include Medicaid, SNAP, Head Start, WIC, school lunches, and indirectly libraries. There's a federal formula through the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the IMLS, that is used to fund programs that OLIS does. So we receive money based on the population of Rhode Island. So it does affect you too, apart from as a citizen. More reasons why it's important. This is one you might have heard rumors swirling around. The population count from the census determines the representation in Congress. So right now in Rhode Island, if we have an undercount of our population, we are at risk of losing one of our representatives to Congress. That is why Rhode Island has had a very organized and statewide approach, because nobody wants that to happen. Other reasons why the census is important: we want to make sure that we have fair representation and civil rights. So when we are drawing voting districts, you want to make sure that you are actually drawing voting districts that are accurately reflecting the population. You want to make sure that we have correct demographic data. So when people are trying to decide about distributing federal funding and doing programs, that it's accurate, and that we are, say, for example, putting enough money into programs for children based on the number of children that actually live in the state. And finally, planning for Rhode Island's future. As I mentioned, the data that they gather in the census is used for all kinds of things. So businesses, governments, and nonprofits use the census data to inform planning decisions. So they decide where they will open businesses, if Rhode Island is a good prospect for their new business or for expanding, and how to invest in our communities. So it is in everyone's best interest to make sure that the data that the census is that data collected by the census is accurate, so that it can be used correctly to provide the correct services for our state. As something that we want to keep in mind as we are helping to promote the census in our communities, and as we are working at a statewide level, is that there are populations and tracts, or parts of communities that have been identified as hard to count. So hard to count tracts are geographic areas with self-response rates lower than 73%. That means those are places where they receive the mailing that says, fill out your census, and they ignore it until eventually somebody has to go out and knock on their door and ask them to take it. So what we're looking for, ideally, are tracts where everybody will respond on their own online the first time they get the notice in the mail. Hard to count tracts don't have that, and they base this on previous years' census's response, other surveys, as well as the populations that live in certain communities. Which brings us to the second kind of hard to count group, which is by population. So hard to count populations are groups considered vulnerable to an undercount. These can include racial and ethnic minorities, low-income households, immigrants and refugees, children under 5, seniors and older adults, homebound folks, people with disabilities, people in non-traditional housing, LGBTQ plus folks. And something to consider, not all the libraries in Rhode Island serve communities that have hard to count tracts, the hard to count tracts on our map are pretty concentrated into the urban core for the most part, but every library serves hard to count populations. We all serve children under the age of 5. We all serve seniors, people with disabilities, and so on. So all libraries, even if you don't have hard to count tracts in your town, should still be promoting the census and thinking about how you might be able to target those particular populations. Something to consider about populations that are more likely to be undercounted: not only are they more likely to be undercounted, they are more vulnerable when there is an undercount. So undercounting young children might affect funding for SNAP and WIC, which then in turn harms that population. So we want to make sure that we're getting the word out to groups that might be further marginalized by not being counted. If you are curious about the hard to count situation in your community, I have put a link, and I will share the slides with everyone in addition to the video, to the hard to count map. We can take a look at it quite quickly, which can show you about your community. We'll see how long it takes to load. Sorry. Oh, well, that's not what we wanted to have happen. Wait for the program to respond. Sorry, everyone. All right, we're going to restart the slides. Thank you for your patience. Here we go. We'll try the map one more time. If it doesn't work this time, we will give up. Here we go. So this is the hard to count map. We can type in the state of Rhode Island. And we're just going to turn this thing off. So you can see by looking at the state, everywhere that's red, orange, or yellow is a tract, a specific group of streets or a neighborhood that has historically been hard to count. You'll notice, like I mentioned, they're mostly concentrated around Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, Woonsocket, Newport. There's a funny little red splotch in South Kingston, which is where the University of Rhode Island is, and we'll talk about why that's hard to count in a little bit. But you can also see on this map, we can turn on undercount risk for young children, which is a hard to count population. And here you'll see that there's high and very high risk in all kinds of areas, not just that urban core. So just to drive home the point that no matter where your community is, you serve young children, you serve hard to count populations. And so if you're thinking about a census outreach strategy, it's definitely for everyone. It's not only for people, for towns that have those hard to count tracts. Let's just make sure I'm still sharing the right screen. Okay, so here we go. So that's hard to count. So what is the timeline? How is the census going to be unfolding? It starts now almost exactly a month from today. On March 12th, households will begin to receive notices in the mail with instructions to complete the census questionnaire online. Ideally, and in a perfect world, that is what everyone will do after their first mailing. There will be upwards of, I believe, 5 mailings that go to people's homes, giving them opportunities to respond. The first 3 will only be promoting the online version, and then eventually it will switch and give people an actual paper form that they can send back. April 1st is the day we consider Census Day, not because people are likely to fill out their census on April 1st, but because that is the day where you are counting where you live. So if you move on March 30th to a new place, you would count the new place because wherever you live on April 1st is the day. April is also when we have something called group quarters count. So that's where census takers visit college dorms, senior centers, homeless shelters, places where people live in groups to be counted. So those folks who live, say, in a college dorm do not need to fill out their census themselves. They will be counted as part of that group quarters initiative. In May 2020, census takers, I might go back and forth between saying census takers and enumerators, but they're the same thing. They'll begin going door to door to visit households that have not yet responded. So these are folks that haven't filled it out online, haven't sent back their paper form yet. Big deadline to know is that you need to reply. Everyone needs to reply by July 31st of 2020. If you do not reply by then, you do not get counted, and you do not get a chance to get counted until, once again, 2030. Something to consider, this is a very complicated, this is a very pared down schedule. It's much more complicated than this. The census is the biggest federal government campaign outside of the military. So just something to think about. So what's going to be on the census? This is a question you get a lot. So it's quite simple. As I mentioned, it's about 10 questions. If you have more than one person living in your house, it can be a few more because you have to answer the same questions for everybody who lives in your house. So it will ask how many people are living or staying in your household, whether your home is rented or owned. And that's, so they can have demographic data and inform, planning and housing programs. They will ask about the sex, age, race, and ethnicity of each person who lives in the house and the relationship of each person in the household. So if I'm filling out the census and I have a husband, I would indicate that he was my husband, or if I have a child, I would indicate that they are my child. So it's all the relationships relative to the person who is the primary person filling out the form. There will be no citizenship question. You likely heard on the news that the current administration was trying to get a question about whether you are a citizen or not onto the census. That was rejected. And so it will not be on there. Some of the damage has already been done because many people think that it will be on there. And so that is likely to suppress responses from communities of immigrants and non-English speakers. So again, if you're planning to do outreach, consider those pockets of your community that may be afraid and see if you can help build their trust in the census, because that question will not be on there. If you would like to, we'll see if this time the link works. You can explore the actual form. So you can see the paper version of it and actually look at what questions will be asked in case you were curious to see in advance. It also offers a great justification for why every question is there. Oh, we did just get a question. Are trans individuals encouraged to put the sex gender they identify as? I don't know the answer to that question, but I would say yes. These are not necessarily, they're not going to be, let me figure out how to say this right, vetted for being correct. Nobody's going to look at somebody's driver's license relative to their census answers. This is all disaggregated data. So I would say yes. There is no option other than male, female is something to consider. There isn't a non-binary option. That is something that I know a lot of people have been asking about in all of the census meetings I have been at. I believe it was introduced as an idea too late to be able to change. Emily, I will follow up with someone that I work with, someone from the census, to see if they have any more information about that. That's a great question. So you can look through the questions and see, is this house, apartment, or mobile home? And then it explains why they ask, and it goes through all of the different questions. So if you would like a preview of what it's going to be like, or if somebody asks at a reference desk, what is this thing and what are they going to ask, you'll be able to answer that question. So that brings us to what's different in 2020. There are a couple of things that are different that should be on your radar. The biggest one, and I've already mentioned it, and you've probably heard about it already if you've been following the census at all, is that 2020 is the first time that the census is offered online self-response. So you'll be able to go to the Census website and just do a simple form to answer your questions. The website will be available in English and 12 additional languages. If somebody needs another language that's not one of those 12, there are language guides available in 59 non-English languages. So they don't actually let you fill the census out in those 59 languages, but they will provide translation services as you go along. For folks who are having a hard time and their language is not represented in the online form, there's also a phone line where you can call, and you can do it over the phone in order to help people for whom the internet form is going to be a barrier. So 2 other changes. There is now a write-in option for race and ethnicity. So if somebody doesn't feel like the options capture their ethnicity or race, they may write it in. And for the first time, there is the same-sex household relationships. So you can indicate a same-sex married partner or a same-sex partner not married that you live with. And those are both new things. So of course, we're talking about this because we want to make sure we're thinking about things that could go wrong. So one thing's very specific to Rhode Island is there was some confusion, we think, about the 2018 end-to-end test in Providence. This was the only test in the entire country, but we have heard that some folks think that they already completed their census. It was a real shame that the test had its budget slashed. That's why there was only one test. They had planned several across the country. And so there was no advertising. There were very little communication around the test. And so if you live in Providence County and you filled it out, as I do, you will know that it didn't say anywhere that it was a test. It acted as though it was the real census. So making sure that people take it again is potentially going to be an issue if you are in Providence County. Other things that could go wrong. People are still afraid about the collection of citizenship data, and that could discourage people who identify as immigrants or are non-English speakers. And then some people have concerns about internet access. You know, are people going to be able to access the questionnaire and fill it out successfully? Again, there are options outside of the internet, so hopefully those will capture folks who are not able to do it on their own. And then cybersecurity. The census has been diligently testing their systems. They have presented a lot of confidence that the data will be safe, it will be encrypted, and that it is safe to fill your form out online. I would suggest, you know, if somebody's taking it in the library and they ask you a question, that you might tell them to close their computer window when they are finished and log off the machine when they are done, as they would do to protect anything that they put online. But the census doesn't collect any personal information like bank accounts or social security numbers, so there's nothing super sensitive that's getting transmitted anyway. So those are kind of the big broad strokes of the census, a census 101, if you will. There's a lot more information, a lot more specific things and nitty-gritty details, and I'll show you later where the best places to find the answers to your questions if you have more questions about the census itself. But that brings us to part 2, libraries and the census, and why we have all been talking about the census, specifically in libraries this time around. So just as I mentioned in the previous section, I used a lot of information from the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee. A lot of this information comes from the American Library Association. I mentioned that they have a task force about the census. They've done a whole campaign, Count on Libraries. They have great social media graphics that you can borrow. They have slides that you can adapt, which is what I have done here. They have a bunch of webinars, and we'll go through some of the resources that ALA has. So why are we talking about the census in libraries? Of course, your library is a popular point for internet access. If people are going to be taking the test online and people are use your library for the internet, then there is a good chance that they will try to take the census in your library. You are also community hubs that serve all Rhode Islanders. So every place that has a hard to count census tract has a library nearby. Every community has hard to count populations in it. So libraries are uniquely situated, as they are with any kind of community organizing and outreach effort, to be able to reach the populations in your town that might be vulnerable to an undercount. Libraries are also, of course, trusted sources of information. So as misinformation about the census comes out, it will be important for libraries to know the real information and to be able to make sure that they are sharing accurate information out with their communities. Misinformation campaigns around the census are designed to suppress the count, to get vulnerable populations to not report themselves, and to, affect funding and to affect political representation. So there's a lot of potential for misinformation out there. And of course, finally, public institutions, libraries are public institutions. So you are also affected by the distribution of federal dollars. And of course, as citizens of Rhode Island, you have a vested interest in accurate, equitable representation of where we live. So again, I mentioned the ALA resources that they've compiled. When I share out the slides, this link will take you to their entire advocacy page. It has articles, links to their old webinars, upcoming trainings. There's a toolkit. There's a little 2-pager sheet if you want to, put a couple copies of that at your reference desk so that all your frontline staff can read it. ALA has done a great job of compiling stuff for libraries to use. There are a couple upcoming programs from ALA, so if you have targeted populations that you want to work with, there's an YALSA webinar about engaging teens. The Office of Diversity Literacy, ODLOS. Office of Diversity, Literacy, and Opportunity? Something. I'm very sorry, I don't remember that acronym. They're doing Census 2020 outreach to communities of color. And if anybody is going to the PLA conference at the end of the month, there will be a 2020 Census countdown session, what you need to know. They also have a series of webinars that they've already hosted, and I will show you where you can find those in a little bit. So what can libraries do? So on this slide, we have 2 things that either might not be relevant to you or you may have already done. So the first is participate in a complete count committee. Complete count committees are coalitions of tribal, state, and local governments, community-based organizations, educational organizations, basically any stakeholder in a community that come together to ensure that their community has a complete count. You can follow the link to see if your community has one. We do not have a ton of local ones here in Rhode Island. Westerly, Johnston, Woonsocket, Pawtucket, Central Falls, Providence, Newport, Wakefield, the Narragansett Indian Tribe, Warwick, and Cranston are the ones listed on that site. So if you are working in one of those towns or nearby, you might want to consider teaming up your library with those with your complete count committee. We also have a statewide complete count committee that's doing a lot of outreach work. So OLIS is represented on that committee, and we are hoping to share any information that comes out of them with libraries. You can also help community members apply for census jobs. Those efforts have been underway for several months. Many of you have already hosted job fairs. If you haven't and you're interested in helping the census recruit census takers, you can always email me and I can put you in touch with Deb Smith, who is our partnership specialist. But I believe that has already been actively happening around the state. Hopefully they will hire enough people soon since the census is about to start. Next, what can libraries do? Prepare for the increased use of computer and the internet. This may or may not happen, but we do expect that people will take the census in your library, because if they are using your library as their main source of internet, that would be the likely place for them to reply online. So you don't need any special equipment in your library. All of our libraries have appropriate internet speeds to be able to handle the census. It's just a simple browser website. It can work on a phone, it can work on a tablet, it can work on a laptop or a desktop computer. they may come with questions looking for help, how to find it, how to access it. The census also does require an online application, so people may ask you for help when they are looking for jobs. If you are interested, if you think there's going to be a lot of interest, or you just want to do this as part of your community outreach or promotion strategy, you could create a dedicated census kiosk. So take a laptop, say, and have it set up with the census website right there, with signage that makes it clear that this is for filling out the census. The Providence Community Library did that during the end-to-end test. They weren't super well used, but I think a lot of people stopped and looked, and they got a lot of interest. So as part of a promotion strategy to get people aware of the census, a kiosk might be a good idea. So I've included a link on this slide to the 2020 Census Kiosk Toolkit by an organization called Next Generation Cities. So they have good advice about how you might go about setting up a kiosk in your public organization. The next thing you can do is anticipate questions. That goes along with assuming that people are probably going to come in to your library trying to do the census and may ask you questions. These are just a few questions that I figured I would upfront answer. Obviously, this is not going to be all of them, but at every census meeting I've ever been at, no matter what the theme of the meeting has been, the following questions have come up. The first is, can you fill out the form for me? Should library workers help people fill out their forms? The answer to that is no. Only trained census takers should actually help someone fill out their form. Census takers take an oath that is legally binding. So if they share confidential data that they learn from helping someone fill out their census, that could be subject to jail time or fines. You have taken no such oath as a library employee, so you can help people get to the census and you can help them find the answers to their questions, but you should never actually fill out someone's form for them. People may ask, should I count my cousin who is on vacation and sleeping on my couch? Should I count my daughter who is in college and lives in a dorm? Should I count my baby that was born on March 30th, 2020? And people will have very, very specific questions about who they might want to count. So the census has put together a great who to count page that has very, very specific directions for special circumstances. Sorry. So someone who's on vacation visiting at your house would not get counted because they don't live at your house, but someone who's been staying with you for 3 months because they were evicted from their home would get counted because they are living with you. Same thing with babies, college students. College students, if they live in dorms, should be counted in their dorms. I would not expect the average library employee to remember all of this, but the link here to the Who to Count page will go through all of those special circumstances and you can help people figure out if they should come to you with that question. More questions that we always get. What about individuals experiencing homelessness? How do we count them? So typically, people experiencing homelessness are counted during the phase that I mentioned, the group quarters. So that is where they go out to homeless shelters and they'll count everybody on one night who's in the shelter. They also do point in time counts for known outdoor locations where people who are experiencing homelessness might be sleeping. So that happens every year, not just during the census year. There is one night that they go out, a whole big operation, and they count everybody that they can find who's under a bridge or on a bench or in an alley. And they do their best, and that's where we get our demographics and our numbers through the census for people experiencing homelessness. Next question that I anticipate you might get, especially at a library, if you are encouraging people to sign up or to fill out their form in your library, is how do I fill out my online form without a unique ID? Every mailing that goes to people's houses will have an ID on it, and that's how you're going to kind of sign into your test. If you do not have your unique ID handy, say you throw out the paper or you didn't bring it with you and you've come to the library, all you need to know is your address. So anybody can fill their census out, they just need to know their valid home address. There will be more questions other than these. These are the kind of big overarching ones that I've heard again and again and again at every census event that I've been at. What's going to be important for you guys is to know where to get the answers. And that goes along with one of the other big roles libraries can play, which is fighting misinformation and scams. So making sure that you know where all the answers are to everything so that your community has the best information available. I'll have to fix that link. I will open it up over here. One second. Okay. I'll make sure to fix the link before I send out the slides. So this is 2020census.gov. This website is fantastic. It has everything that you could possibly want to know about the census in very easy to follow, simple website form. So if you are not sure who to count, you can go to conducting the count. This is going to be how they do it. It will give you how they're going to do it, counting everybody in the right place. You know, it has little bump outs like how do you count people experiencing homelessness? And you can keep following along ways to respond, the impact in your community, fighting rumors. It has answers to a bunch of questions. You can follow in order. You can look through. Here's the who to count page that I referenced. So it explains how you count people under your roof. It has this fun little quiz where it asks you if you should count someone and you can answer yes or no. And then it has all the special circumstances that you might encounter. So that's Census 2020.gov. That's going to be your main reference source for if people have questions that you don't know the answer to. This is also a great source if you want to train the rest of your staff to be able to answer these questions. Census2020.gov. It's going to be excellent. And for that reason, I will make sure I fix the link in the slides. The next kind of big bucket of things that you can do as a library for the census is to share information with your community. We are already sharing information about all kinds of things in our libraries. So you can display posters, hand out postcards or hand cards, wear buttons that promote the census, and so on. You could highlight the census in newsletters, social media, and on your website. And we're going to ask that you use Rhode Island branded materials, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the Rhode Island section. But these are easy things that you can do just to make sure your community is aware that the census is happening. You can also host events. So you might want to plan a special event just for the census. Ideas that have been thrown out there are a count-a-thon, a Census Day party on April 1st, or if you just have a big, regularly scheduled community celebration, have a table promoting the census, have flyers, have things to pass out, announce that the census is happening in case people aren't aware, just making sure that you're spreading awareness to your community that the census is happening. Once again, at your events, you can use the Rhode Island branded materials, which will be available to you for free. And you can also invite the census to actually come out to your events. So census enumerators, also known as census takers, can come out to provide something called mobile questionnaire assistance, where they'll bring an iPad with them and they will help people fill out the census right then and there. And they can also answer those kind of persistent and tough questions that you don't know about because you don't work for the census. And we're going to talk, I'll give you her contact information, but Deb Smith is our Rhode Island Partnership Specialist from the United States Census. So if you have dates for an event, she can help you arrange to have somebody come out to your event. The sooner she hears about your dates that you have, the better. The more likely it is she'll be able to have someone available to come out and be a part of your event. Emily asks in the chat, can teens fill out the form? That is a very good question. Can teens fill out the census? Certainly, I believe if you are 18 or older, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to fill out the census. Most teens, I imagine, are going to be captured by whoever is the head of household who is filling out the census. Let me see if I can get that answer for you, Emily. You are asking very good questions that I don't have the answers to. I'm sure Yelsa will also explain whether that is true or not. I think if it comes down to, is a teen filling out the census on behalf of their entire household or no one, then yes, I would think a teen could fill out the form. I will get a better answer for you, again, along with the other question you asked about trans individuals. Thank you. And then another thing your library can do is to engage your youth services. So specifically, children ages 0 to 5 are one of the hard to count populations. This is exacerbated when those children are part of a second population that is also historically hard to count. So children of immigrants, children in low-income families, children who live in complicated living arrangements are more likely to be undercounted. Some people think that for some reason babies don't count as people when they live in their houses. So children age 0 to 5 are meant to be counted. They are an important part of our population. So you can encourage your youth services department to display census materials in the children's room. Definitely to distribute census materials during children's programs and story times. They might even want to have a special census story time, you know, talking about I count, you count, we all count. That's the Rhode Island sort of little catchy theme tagline for the census. You could have a story time about counting. You can also, once again, invite census takers to come to children's programs so that their parents might be able to fill out the census while the kids are busy with the program. You can learn more. There are lots of resources for helping with kids at the Census 2020 for Rhode Island Libraries resource guide. There's a page about counting kids, and we'll be adding resources to that as we find them. Emily Goodman with another question: what happens if multiple people from the same household fill out the form? So the census goes through and they do a certain level of validation of the data. So if two people from the same household, I believe if they try to fill it out online, it will say that it's already been filled out. But even if somehow they both, like one fills it out online, the other one mails it or talks to a person, it'll get discarded. They have systems in place for data analysis that will say, like, this is a repeat, we have the same address. So we know that, you know, this is the same household. It also collects people's names, so it will be able to probably determine it that way. So they have safeguards in place, data analysis wise, to make sure that that won't happen. So what's happening specific in Rhode Island? So those are a bunch of ideas for your library. Not every idea is going to work in every library, but at the very least, every library should be prepared to know that the census is happening and to answer the basic questions. But if you are interested in kind of keying into what Rhode Island itself is doing, we're going to go through a few resources that we have specific to the state that libraries can hop on to, so you don't have to invent anything or start from scratch. So you can see right here on this slide, I count, you count, we all count. This is the specific Rhode Island logo. You will see it around a bunch of places, hopefully across social media, and hopefully in other places as the census gets underway. So I mentioned we have the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee. This group was convened by the governor. It has 61 members on it from across all different sectors. Karen Meller, the chief of the Office of Library and Information Services, has been an active member on the now to be abbreviated RICCC. So you can follow the Complete Count Committee on social media. They are at RI Census 2020 on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So they have been working since early 2019 to put together an outreach strategy that is statewide. They were responsible for a series of grants that were conducted through the Rhode Island Foundation to help count hard to count populations. They have been responsible for the design of all of the statewide materials, and they are going to be responsible for the distribution of statewide materials. So it's a good group to know about. Because Karen is on that, we have access to all of the news out of there, and we are working hard to make sure we are sharing it out with libraries. So I've mentioned before, Rhode Island promotional materials. So right now you can't get physical materials yet, but they are coming mid to late February. We don't have an exact date, but we do know that it should be before the actual census starts on March 12th. The materials are going to include posters, flyers for handing out in your community, postcards. They also call them, I think, hand cards, which would be, you know, just a quick thing that you could, like, say, for example, stick in everyone's book when they're checking out, or put a stack your circulation desk or on your reference desk for folks to take. And they will have buttons. So every library can get buttons that their frontline staff can wear, on their name tags, or, they can put them up again near the computers or near the circulation desk. Right now, we are working on a distribution plan for those materials. So once we know exactly what's available and exactly when, the plan is for OLIS to send those things out to you through our delivery system so that you do not need to do anything extra other than potentially indicate how many of things you might want. We are still working on that. While it is unknown, we cannot give you a definitive answer how that will work and when they will come, but just keep listening and we will keep sharing out that information. You will also notice that there is a link to weekly social media messaging. So every week, the Complete Count Committee, which is working with a design and marketing company, puts out a new message. So the first week of January, it was 2020 is the year we count. Last week was all about something called the Census Pledge, which we'll talk about in a second. 50 days until the census was a couple weeks ago when the census was, 50 days away. And so I've been compiling all of those files onto our LibGuide, so you can find all of the old week's social media messages. We're also sharing them as they come every week, so you can always follow OLIS RI on Twitter and Facebook and reshare what we are posting or find those pictures and images that way. The materials that are promotional are going to be available. Everything online is available in English and Spanish. Print materials are available, I want to say, in 4 languages, but they're also available to be translated into up to 7 languages upon request. I do not have a list of what those languages are, but whenever we have the full information about those materials, I'll be sure to share the list of languages. I mentioned take the Census Pledge. So the Complete Count Committee has partnered up with an app. I don't know what the app is called, but you can text pledge to this number and it will be you saying, I've taken the Census Pledge, and then it will also provide you with updates throughout. So on March 12th, it will probably give you an update that says, hey, check your mail. So they're encouraging people to take the pledge, share the pledge with your communities. This is also available in Spanish, so you would text the word pledge in Spanish. I don't have it written down in front of me and I don't speak Spanish, but it is all the same information. And at the social media page on our LibGuide, I have all of the Spanish language materials available as well if you have a large Spanish speaking population in your community. So that is the Census Pledge. And then we have something that I've mentioned several times, but just to hit home again, something called Mobile Questionnaire Assistance, sometimes abbreviated MQA. So this is where census response representatives, census takers, census enumerators, whatever you want to call them, will be deployed out into the communities starting March 24th. So these folks will be deployed on a weekly basis as the census, again, is unfolding. They will be deployed based on response rates. So if a particular community has a very low response rate, they might go out into that community to help drum up responses. If you know you're having an event, especially if your event is going to touch on hard to count populations, you can be proactive in your requests. So you can still request census takers to come to your events even before this mid-April response rate deployment happens. And Deb Smith, our partnership specialist, will do the best to make sure that you can have census takers at your event as they're available. Yes. So Deb Smith, I've said her name several times and I wanted to give her her own slide because she's an important person to know. So I mentioned before, she's our U.S. Census Rhode Island Partnership Specialist. So she works for the United States Census. She is an expert in all things census. If you have a question about the census that say I can't answer or the website can't answer, she can answer your questions. If you want to invite the census to come to an event, she is your person for that. If you would like to have a census job fair or see if she still has need for training spaces and you would like to volunteer your room, she is the person who is organizing all of that. She is doing an awful lot. She is fantastic about answering your questions, about replying to emails. I highly encourage if you have an event and you do want someone, or you just have a question that we can't answer, she's your person for that. So that is kind of the big overview of Census 101 for Rhode Island libraries. If you need more information, these are the kind of top places. There's information coming from lots of different places, as I mentioned when we first started. So I have worked very hard to distill some of that information to a resource guide for you. So everything that was in this presentation is also somewhere in here. You'll notice this is the social media graphics page. You can follow the complete count committee here. There's a page about children, some FAQs, which I will add to. I will also add the recording of this webinar to this page under training. This is where you can also find the ALA census webinars that have already happened. These links will take you right to the recordings if you are just eager for more information about the census, even after this. So that's the OLIS guide. I already mentioned ALA several times, the key facts for libraries. They have a toolkit, which is about a 20-page document if you really want to dive deep into how libraries can help with the effort. They have a little 2-page paper that I mentioned. This is a summary of the toolkit, so if you want to try to get everybody on staff on board, distribute that 2-pager to everyone so that they know what's going on. Their webinars, and then their full advocacy page, which has almost an overwhelming number of resources. Once again, the 2020 census website is going to be your go-to place for all the information actually from the census, and Deb Smith is the person you want to contact from the census if you are trying to do an event, do a job fair, or you just have lingering questions that I cannot answer for you. That is Census 101 for Rhode Island libraries. Now is a good time for questions. Emily has a question that is slightly off topic, which is there an easy way to navigate to all of the OLIS LibGuides from the OLIS homepage? The answer to that is actually no right now. But if you ever are in a LibGuide, it's very easy by clicking on LibGuides. And LibGuides should exist in their sort of subject areas. Right now, the census one is right there. I'll address that, Emily, and think about a good way to get you straight to the LibGuides. But for now, if you do that and you click LibGuides, that's the best shortcut I can think of. It's not very obvious. Does anybody have any other questions about the census before we sign off? Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining me today and being flexible with the reschedule. I will be sure to send this recording to you tomorrow, and any other accompanying links or materials that will be useful to you. Thank you again.